The Volcareth Dominion had conquered 12 star systems in less than 50 years, and they had done so without ever facing a real challenge from any species they encountered along the way. Commander Vossither stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on his viewing screen, and he felt nothing but contempt for the creatures that lived upon its surface. His intelligence officers had spent months studying these beings called humans, and every report made him more certain that this conquest would be the easiest one yet. The humans were soft and weak and covered in thin skin that could be cut by the simplest blade. They had no claws and no fangs and no venom and no armor of any kind. They could not survive in extreme heat or extreme cold without wrapping themselves in artificial coverings. They needed to eat multiple times every single day, and they needed to sleep for nearly a third of their short lives. But what truly amazed the Volcareth was how these pathetic creatures chose to spend their time. They built hospitals to heal their sick and their wounded, instead of leaving the weak to die as nature intended. They wrote poetry and painted pictures and composed music that served no practical purpose whatsoever. They kept other animals as companions and treated them with love and affection rather than raising them for food or labor. They actually wept at sunsets and at sad stories and at the deaths of creatures they had never even met. Vossither had laughed when he first read these reports, and his war council had laughed with him. How could such emotional and sentimental beings ever hope to stand against the might of the Volcareth Dominion? Ambassador Kethrol was sent down to the surface to deliver the terms of surrender, and he arrived in a shuttle that landed in the center of a great human city. The humans gathered around him with expressions of wonder and curiosity rather than fear, and many of them smiled at him and waved and took pictures with small devices they carried in their hands. Kethrol stood before the leaders of the human world and spoke the words he had spoken to a dozen conquered species before them. He told them that the Volcareth Dominion claimed their planet and all its resources. He told them that they would serve the Dominion as a labor force and that resistance would result in their complete destruction. He told them that they had 7 days to accept these terms or face the consequences. The human leaders listened to his words with serious expressions on their faces, and then they did something that no other species had ever done before. They asked to negotiate. They spoke of peace and cooperation and mutual benefit. They talked about sharing knowledge and technology and culture. They suggested that humans and Volcareth could become partners and allies rather than masters and slaves. They used words like friendship and understanding and compassion. Kethrol reported all of this to Commander Vossither, and the entire War Council erupted in mocking laughter. These foolish humans actually believed they could talk their way out of conquest. They actually thought their words and their feelings mattered against the power of Volcareth weapons. Vossither decided that these naive creatures needed a demonstration of what true power looked like. He ordered his fleet to move into attack position above 3 major human cities. He gave the humans one final chance to surrender without conditions. The humans refused. They kept talking about peace and understanding, and how violence was never the answer. They begged the Volcareth to reconsider and to choose a different path. Vossither gave the order to fire. The orbital bombardment lasted less than 10 minutes, but in that short time, 3 great human cities were reduced to burning craters. 12 million humans died in an afternoon, and their deaths were broadcast across the entire planet, so that all humans would understand what awaited them if they continued to resist. Vossither watched the destruction from his command chair and felt satisfied that this lesson would break the spirit of these emotional creatures. He expected to see panic and despair. He expected desperate pleas for mercy. He expected immediate and unconditional surrender. But something strange happened instead. Ambassador Kethrol reported from the surface that the humans were not reacting the way conquered species usually reacted. They were not screaming or running or begging. They were not turning on each other or falling into chaos. Instead, they had gone very quiet and very still. The humans who had smiled at Kethril and waved at him were no longer smiling. Their faces had become blank and expressionless. Their eyes, which had once sparkled with curiosity and warmth, had become flat and cold and empty. When they spoke, their voices carried no emotion at all. Kethril felt something he had never felt before when facing a conquered species. He felt afraid. He tried to explain this to the War Council, but they dismissed his concerns as foolishness. What could these soft and weak creatures possibly do against the might of the Volcaroth? They had no real weapons and no military tradition and no experience with war. But Kethril had studied human history, and he knew something that the War Council did not understand. He knew that humans had spent thousands of years fighting wars against each other. He knew that they had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet many times over. He knew that they had committed acts of violence against their own kind that would make even the Volcaroth pause in horror. And he knew that the most dangerous human was not the one who screamed in anger. The most dangerous human was the one who went quiet, the one who stopped showing emotion, the one who made a decision and then pursued it with cold and relentless determination. Kethril sent one final warning to Commander Vostar before the communication channels went dark. He told him that something was changing in the humans. He told him that they were becoming something else. He told him that by killing those 12 million people, the Volcaroth had awakened something ancient and terrible that should have been left sleeping. Vostar deleted the message without even reading it. He could not have known that at that very moment, in every corner of the human world, something was stirring. In the hearts of billions of humans, a cold fire was beginning to burn. The warmth and kindness that had defined their species was fading away, and in its place something older and darker was rising to the surface. The beast was waking up, and it was hungry for vengeance. The silence was the first thing that confused the Volcaroth. In every other conquest, the defeated species had filled the communication channels with noise. They had sent desperate pleas for mercy and offers of surrender. They had broadcast messages of panic and despair. They had argued among themselves about what to do and who was to blame. But the humans did none of these things. In the days following the orbital bombardment, every human broadcast went dark. Every diplomatic channel was closed. Every attempt by the Volcaroth to make contact was met with nothing but empty static. It was as if the entire human species had simply stopped talking. The listening posts in orbit detected signals, but they were not like anything the Volcaroth had ever encountered before. Billions of encrypted transmissions pulsed between every human settlement on the planet, moving in patterns that the Volcaroth computers could not decode. The signals flowed like blood through veins, connecting every human city and town and village into a single vast network. Commander Vostar was not worried at first. He assumed the humans were simply in shock and that they would soon come to their senses and surrender. He ordered his troops to prepare for ground invasion and told his officers that this would be a simple cleanup operation. But Ambassador Kethril was worried. He was still on the surface under diplomatic protection, living in a human building in a human city, surrounded by humans who no longer seemed like the same creatures he had met just weeks before. The change in them was subtle but unmistakable. The smiles were gone. The warm greetings and the curious questions and the friendly waves had all disappeared. When humans passed him in the corridors, they looked at him with eyes that held no emotion at all. Their faces were blank and calm and completely unreadable. When they spoke, their voices were flat and measured, with none of the musical emotion that had once made human speech so distinctive. Kethril tried to engage them in conversation, but they answered his questions with short and simple words and then walked away. He tried to learn what they were planning, but no one would tell him anything. The silence was not just in the communication channels. It was in the humans themselves. He spent his nights studying human history, reading about their wars and their conflicts and their struggles. And the more he read, the more frightened he became. He learned about something the humans called total war, where entire societies transformed themselves into weapons. He learned about factories that stopped making toys and started making bombs. He learned about scientists who turned their knowledge to destruction. He learned about artists who became propaganda makers, and teachers who became drill sergeants, and doctors who became killers. He learned that humans had a phrase for what was happening to them. They called it going cold. The phrase appeared again and again in human literature and philosophy. Human writers described it as the shutting down of emotion, the locking away of warmth and kindness and mercy. They wrote about how humans could transform themselves into something else when they were pushed too far, something ancient and terrible that had kept them alive through millions of years of evolution. The poets called it the beast within. The philosophers called it the survival instinct. The soldiers called it the warrior spirit. But whatever name they gave it, they all agreed on one thing. It was the most dangerous thing about humanity. Kethro sent report after report to Commander Vossither, begging him to listen. He told him that the humans were not defeated. He told him that they were changing, becoming something new and terrible. He told him that the silence was not surrender but preparation. But the War Council refused to take his warning seriously. How could these soft creatures pose any real threat? They had no armored hides or venomous fangs. They died from simple injuries that a Velkareth warrior would barely notice. They were weak and emotional and sentimental. Vossither ordered the ground invasion to begin. The first wave of Velkareth troops landed in a region that the humans called Siberia, a vast frozen wasteland in the northern part of their planet. The Velkareth were cold-blooded reptiles who thrived in heat, but their commanders had chosen this landing zone because it was far from major human population centers. They planned to establish a base and then push south into warmer territory. But they had made a terrible mistake. The cold was far worse than their intelligence reports had suggested. The Velkarith soldiers shivered and shook and struggled to move their frozen limbs. Their weapons malfunctioned in the freezing temperatures. Their vehicles stalled and refused to start. Their communications equipment cracked and broke. And then the humans came. They emerged from the frozen forests like ghosts, dressed in white clothing that made them invisible against the snow. They moved in perfect silence, their breath misting in the frozen air, their eyes empty and cold. They struck without warning and disappeared before the Velkareth could react. The first battle lasted only 2 hours, and when it was over, 3,000 Velkareth soldiers lay dead in the snow. Not a single human body was found. Vossither received the news with disbelief. How could this have happened? How could these weak and soft creatures have defeated his trained warriors? He ordered more troops to the surface, this time to warmer regions where the Velkareth could fight at full strength. But the same thing happened again and again. The humans seemed to know where every attack would come before it happened. They had prepared defenses and traps and ambushes in every location. They fought with weapons the Velkareth had never seen before, weapons that seemed to have been built specifically to kill reptiles. And always, they fought with that terrible cold silence. No battle cries, no taunts, no celebrations of victory. Just quiet, efficient, merciless killing. Kethro watched from his window as human soldiers marched through the streets of the city, and he finally understood what he was seeing. These were not the same humans who had greeted him with smiles and curiosity. These were not the gentle creatures who wrote poetry and cried at sunsets. The beast had awakened, and there was no warmth left in its eyes. He sent one final message to Vossither. You have made a terrible mistake. You thought their kindness was weakness, but it was a choice. You thought their emotions made them soft, but they have locked those emotions away. What remains is something older and colder and more dangerous than anything we have ever faced. May the gods have mercy on us all, because the humans will not. In just 60 days of silence, humanity had transformed itself into a weapon. Every factory on the planet had stopped making the things that humans normally made. No more toys, no more luxury goods, no more entertainment devices. Instead, every machine now worked day and night to produce instruments of war. Tanks and aircraft and missiles and bombs rolled off assembly lines that never stopped, operated by workers who never seemed to sleep. Scientists who had spent their lives curing diseases now worked in secret laboratories to create new ones. They studied Velkareth biology with cold precision, searching for weaknesses that could be exploited. They engineered viruses and bacteria and chemical agents designed specifically to kill reptilian creatures, while leaving humans unharmed. They invented new weapons that could freeze the cold-blooded invaders solid or burn through their armored scales like paper. Artists who had painted beautiful pictures and written touching stories now created propaganda that spread across every screen and speaker on the planet. Their words and images forged billions of individual humans into a single unified force. Poets wrote battle hymns that soldiers sang as they marched to war. Musicians composed anthems that played in every city and every village, reminding the humans of what had been taken from them and what must be done in response. Teachers became trainers, turning ordinary civilians into deadly fighters in a matter of weeks. Doctors learned combat medicine, treating wounds on battlefields rather than in hospitals. Farmers became suppliers, growing food to feed the massive armies that were forming across the globe. Even children helped, working in factories and running messages and keeping watch for enemy ships in the sky. But it was the soldiers who truly showed what humanity had become. Commander Vossither sent his invasion fleet to Earth, expecting to crush a demoralized and broken population. He expected fear and panic and desperate resistance that would crumble at the first sign of real force. He expected the emotional humans to fall apart when faced with the horrors of war. Instead, he found warriors who fought with a cold efficiency that made even his most experienced veterans pause in fear. The human soldiers advanced through freezing battlefields that the cold-blooded Velkareth could not survive. They fought in blizzards and ice storms and frozen wastelands, using the weather itself as a weapon against their reptilian enemies. They did not shiver or shake or slow down. They marched through the killing cold with steady steps and empty eyes, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. And when they fought, they showed no mercy at all. There was no anger in their attacks, no rage or hatred or passion. They killed with the same calm detachment that a machine might show. They did not taunt their enemies or celebrate their victories. They simply identified targets and eliminated them with quiet efficiency. Captured Velkareth soldiers were treated with cold professionalism that was somehow more terrifying than torture. They were questioned for information and then disposed of without ceremony. No cruelty, no violence, no revenge. Just practical elimination of enemy combatants. Vossither watched the footage from the front lines with growing horror. One video showed a human unit marching through a mountain pass during a terrible snowstorm. The visibility was almost zero, and the temperature was so low that any Velkareth would have frozen solid in minutes. But the humans walked through it like it was nothing, their formations perfect, their movements precise. When they encountered a Velkareth patrol that had been caught in the storm, the humans did not hesitate. They moved through the helpless reptiles with clinical efficiency, killing each one with a single shot or strike. They did not speak or shout, or even acknowledge their enemies as living beings. They simply did what needed to be done and then moved on. What are they? Vossither whispered to his intelligence officer. The officer had spent weeks studying the humans, and his answer chilled Vossither more than any frozen battlefield ever could. They call it going cold, Commander. It is something that happens to humans when they are pushed beyond their limits. They shut down their emotions and lock away their warmth and become something else entirely. Their philosophers and poets have written about it for thousands of years. They say that beneath all their kindness and compassion, there is an ancient creature that helped their ancestors survive in a dangerous world. A creature that feels nothing and fears nothing and will stop at nothing to destroy its enemies. Vossather shook his head in disbelief. But they were so weak, so emotional. They cried at stories and kept animals as pets. That is what makes them so dangerous, Commander. Other species are always hard and always cold. We know what to expect from them. But the humans choose to be soft. They choose to feel. And when that choice is taken from them, when they are forced to become what they truly are beneath the surface, they become something far worse than any natural predator. The intelligence officer paused and then continued with fear in his voice. Every atrocity in their history was committed not in hot rage, but in cold calculation. Their most terrible weapons were built by calm scientists in quiet laboratories. Their most horrific wars were planned by rational leaders in comfortable rooms. They are not attacking us because they hate us, Commander. They have simply decided that we need to die, and they are executing that decision with the same efficiency that they once used to build their hospitals and compose their music. Vossather stared at the images of human soldiers marching through the snow, their eyes empty of everything except purpose, and he finally understood the truth. He had not invaded a planet of gentle dreamers. He had awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had been sleeping peacefully beneath a blanket of civilization and kindness. And now that it was awake, it would not stop until every Velkareth was dead. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Voster felt true fear. He ordered his fleet to retreat from Earth orbit. He sent emergency messages to the Dominion homeworld, warning them of what was coming. But it was already too late. The beast was fully awake now, and it was hungry for more than just the defense of its home. It wanted vengeance. It wanted to hunt the creatures who had killed its children and burned its cities. And it would chase them across the stars, if that was what it took to see them destroyed. The Cold War had begun, and the humans were coming. The Velkareth thought the war would end when they retreated from Earth, but they were terribly wrong. Humanity followed them into the stars. In the 3 years after the bombardment of Earth, human ships appeared in every star system the Velkaroth had ever claimed. They came in massive fleets that darkened the skies of a dozen worlds. They came with weapons that the galaxy had never seen before, weapons built by scientists who had locked away their conscience and focused only on destruction. And they came with a cold determination that never wavered and never weakened. The first Velkareth colony to fall was a mining world called Keth Prime. The humans arrived without warning, their ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the planet. They did not send demands or ultimatums. They did not ask for surrender. They simply began their attack. The orbital bombardment lasted 6 hours, and when it was finished, every Velkareth military installation on the planet had been reduced to rubble. Then the ground troops landed, moving through the smoking ruins with that terrible silent efficiency. They captured the surviving soldiers and questioned them for information about other Velkareth worlds. Then they executed them without ceremony and moved on to the next target. The galaxy watched in horror as the species they had once pitied became something out of nightmare. Other alien civilizations had observed humanity from afar and had drawn the same conclusions as the Velkareth. They had seen the poetry and the music in the hospitals. They had seen the kindness and the compassion and the emotional tears. They had assumed that humans were too soft to be truly dangerous. Now they understood how wrong they had been. Human commanders employed tactics of such cold brutality that even species known for their ruthlessness grew uneasy. They did not just defeat their enemies. They destroyed them utterly. They manipulated asteroid trajectories to crash into Velkareth cities. They poisoned water supplies with chemicals that killed reptiles but left other life forms unharmed. They deployed biological weapons that spread through Velkareth populations like wildfire. And they hunted the Velkareth leaders with a patience that bordered on obsession. Every commander who had participated in the attack on Earth was tracked and found, no matter where they tried to hide. Every politician who had voted for the invasion was hunted down. Every officer who had given orders was pursued across the stars until there was nowhere left to run. Commander Vossither fled from world to world, always one step ahead of the human hunters. He disguised himself and changed his identity and hid among civilian populations. But the humans always found him. They interrogated captured Velkareth with cold precision, extracting information about his location and his plans. They followed every trail and tracked every rumor until they knew exactly where he was. He was finally captured on a remote jungle world, hiding in a cave like an animal. The human soldiers dragged him out into the light and bound his claws and put a bag over his head. They did not beat him or torture him. They simply transported him to a human ship and locked him in a cell to await his fate. Ambassador Kethrol was still alive, still a prisoner of the humans after all these years. He was brought before a human admiral named Chen Wei-Lin, a woman with gray hair and cold eyes who had commanded the human fleets throughout the long hunt. Kethrol had expected many things from this meeting. He had expected rage and gloating and perhaps torture. He had expected the humans to take revenge for the millions who had died in the orbital bombardment. He had expected to suffer before he died. But Admiral Chun just looked at him with those empty eyes and spoke in a voice that held no emotion at all. "You killed our children," she said. "You burned our cities and murdered 12 million innocent people. You thought our kindness was weakness. You thought our compassion meant we could not fight. You thought our tears made us soft." Kethrol said nothing. There was nothing to say. "You woke something that should have been left sleeping," the Admiral continued. "For thousands of years, we kept the beast chained. We built our civilization on top of it. We created art and music and medicine to prove that we were more than just predators. We chose to be gentle, even though it was not our nature. It was our greatest achievement, our triumph over what we truly are." She paused and looked at him with those terrible cold eyes. "And you took that choice away from us. You forced us to become what we feared most. And now you will serve as a message to the rest of the galaxy." Kethrol finally found his voice. "What message?" he asked. The Admiral did not smile. Her face remained as empty as a mask. "That the universe should never mistake human mercy for inability. We are not kind because we cannot be cruel. We are not gentle because we cannot be violent. We choose these things because we know what we are capable of when we stop choosing. Every other species in the galaxy should look at what happened to the Velkareth and remember this truth." She turned to her guards and gave an order, and they took Kethrol away to his cell. He would live, he realized. The humans were not going to kill him. They were going to let him go, let him return to the scattered remnants of his people, let him spread the warning to every corner of the galaxy. And he understood now that this was a far worse fate than death. He would spend the rest of his life telling others about the mistake the Velkareth had made. He would describe the transformation he had witnessed, the way the smiles had faded and the warmth had died and the beast had risen. He would warn every species he met to never, ever make the same error. The humans had won the war, but they were not finished. They were making sure that no one would ever challenge them again. They were teaching the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. Do not wake the beast. The Velkareth Dominion ceased to exist. After 3 years of relentless hunting, the once mighty empire had been scattered to the winds. Their military was destroyed, their colonies abandoned, their leaders dead or captured. The survivors fled to the far corners of the galaxy, hiding among other species, living as refugees on worlds that would accept them. They were kept alive on purpose. The humans could have wiped them out completely, could have hunted down every last member of their species and ended them forever. But that was not the plan. The Vel'Karath were allowed to survive so they could serve as a warning. And then, as suddenly as it had awakened, the beast went back to sleep. The transformation happened slowly at first. Human soldiers returned home from the war and found that they could not simply go back to their normal lives. They had become something else during the long hunt, something cold and empty, and now they had to find their way back to being human again. Many of them struggled. They woke in the night with memories of the things they had done. They saw the faces of the enemies they had killed and wondered if those enemies had families who mourned them. They remembered the cold efficiency with which they had fought and felt ashamed of what they had become. But slowly, painfully, the warmth began to return. Soldiers who had killed without hesitation learned to feel again. They cried for the first time in years, great heaving sobs that shook their entire bodies. They hugged their families and held their children and remembered what it felt like to love. They went to counselors and support groups and talked about their experiences, helping each other find their way back to the light. The factories that had produced weapons began to make other things again. Toys and games and musical instruments rolled off the assembly lines. Scientists who had engineered diseases and poisons returned to curing cancer and healing the sick. Artists painted pictures of beauty instead of propaganda, and poets wrote about love instead of war. The hospitals reopened, and humans began to heal not just their bodies but their souls. 50 years passed, and Earth became a different world. The scars of the bombardment had healed. New cities had risen where the old ones had fallen, and the memorials to the 12 million dead had become places of quiet reflection rather than monuments to rage. Children grew up hearing stories about the war, but they also grew up in a society that had chosen to be kind again. The beast was sleeping once more, locked away beneath layers of civilization and compassion. But it was not gone. It could never be gone. It was part of humanity, woven into their very nature, passed down through millions of years of evolution. Every human carried it within them, that ancient predator that had helped their ancestors survive in a dangerous world. And every human made the choice, every single day, to keep it sleeping. A delegation from the Consortium of Peaceful Worlds arrived on Earth in the 50th year after the war. This was a coalition of alien species who had watched the conflict from afar and had learned the lesson the humans wanted them to learn. They came seeking alliance and friendship with humanity, hoping to ensure that they would never be seen as enemies. Their ambassador was a crystalline being named Ithros, whose species communicated through patterns of light that flickered across their transparent bodies. He was led to a meeting room in a great human building, where an elderly woman waited to greet him. Her name was Elena Chun, and she was the daughter of Admiral Chen Weilin. She had been a young soldier during the war, one of the cold warriors who had hunted the Vel'Karath across the stars. Now she was old and gray, with wrinkles around her eyes and a gentle smile on her face. Ithros looked at her and saw only a kind old woman, the sort of human who might knit blankets for grandchildren or tend flowers in a garden. But he knew what she had been, what she had done, and it made him careful in how he spoke. "I have one question that I must ask," he said, his light patterns flickering with nervous energy. "My people have debated it for decades, and we've never found an answer that satisfies us. How do you do it? How do you contain such capacity for violence within beings capable of such profound compassion? How can the same species that writes love poetry also engineer plagues? How can creatures who weep at sunsets also hunt their enemies across the stars without mercy?" Elena smiled, but for just a moment, Something flickered in her old eyes, something cold and ancient that made Ithros want to take a step backward. "We do not contain it," she said. "That is the mistake everyone makes. They think we lock the beast away and pretend it does not exist. But that is not what we do at all." She paused and looked at him with an expression that was both gentle and terrifying. "We choose against it," she continued. "Every single day, we make the choice to be kind. Every act of compassion is a victory against what we could become. Every gentle word, every helping hand, every moment of mercy is a battle that we win against our own nature. That is what makes it meaningful. The beast never dies. It only sleeps. And we have learned, through thousands of years of blood and horror, to let it rest." Ithros nodded slowly, understanding beginning to form in his crystalline mind. "But we also never forget how to wake it," Elena added, and now her voice was harder, colder. "And neither, I suspect, will the galaxy." The meeting continued and treaties were signed, and the consortium became allies of humanity. But Ithros never forgot that moment when he saw the beast flicker in the old woman's eyes. He returned to his people and told them what he had learned. He told every species in the consortium, and they spread the message to every corner of the galaxy. Trade with humans. Befriend humans. Learn from humans. Work beside them and laugh with them and share your cultures and your dreams. But never threaten their children. Never burn their cities. Never mistake their kindness for weakness. Because beneath the smiles and the tears and the poetry, something ancient is always watching. It sleeps peacefully as long as the humans choose to keep it sleeping. But if you wake it, if you force them to unlock that cage and let the beast run free, then nothing in the galaxy will save you from what comes next. The beast sleeps, but it never dies. And humanity will never forget how to wake it.